It's a great opportunity for me to be here. I had a really great time looking at your websites about experiential learning, because as I looked at it, it's really what we in NACADA have been talking about for several years in regard to the idea of advising as teaching and learning. Because as we really think about advising, as it's moved from a very prescriptive model back in the 50s and 60s to a developmental model, we're now moving to the idea and the understanding that it really is about teaching and learning. And it really is about the concept of experiential teaching and learning. So it was exciting to read what you're doing in the system and at this institution. And so today I want to talk about advising from that standpoint, and from the standpoint of how it connects to student learning outside the classroom and inside the classroom within that. There was an interesting article this morning in the Chronicle, if you happen to get the morning edition, I do in my email box and read it, by a person that's a music faculty member at Millikan University. And he'd spent 20 years as an adjunct faculty member while I was in graduate school, and he was reflecting on his first year as a full-time faculty member and what that was like. And one of the pieces that he talked about was the idea that he never understood the value or the importance of advising until his first year of teaching full-time, and began talking to students outside the classroom and recognizing the impact that those one-on-one conversations had with students, not only for them, but for him as a faculty member. So if you get a chance to read that article in the Chronicle this morning, it's really a very good article to look at, because he really ties the concept of what we learn inside the classroom is connected to outside, and academic advising is key to pulling those pieces together. So as we talk today, I want to hopefully bring those pieces as we look at that and move forward. One thing we can think about as we're advising and looking is that every student, as they enter our office, we need to think about, first of all, do they feel respected? When a student comes in, do they really see the value that you as an advisor, you as a faculty member see in them as a student within that? Or is it they get the feeling that you're just there to help them get registered? Students can quickly pick up on that. So is that a value that they feel when they walk in? Do they feel valued? Do they feel heard? One of the things that the faculty member wrote about in the Chronicle this morning were the stories that students told him that they never would have said to him as just a teacher in the classroom. Because he said, for 20 years I taught, I didn't hear those stories as an adjunct. But as a full-time, I heard stories that I'd never heard before from students. And he said, so are students heard, I think, is something that's very important. And then last, the fact that they know they matter. You know, one of the things I like to do when I go on campuses is just kind of walk around and talk to students. And of course, they always are very kind to old people. So, you know, they're very nice and very kind. And it's always fun to say to students, tell me what's important about why you chose to come here. And the number of campuses where students say, I felt like I mattered and people really looked at me as something more than a number, are the students and the campuses that you see real student success. Students know when they matter and when they don't. I was at University of New Mexico State recently, and I just walked around campus. I had that thrown off, so I put on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, was walking around just talking to students. And I said to every student, why'd you come here? It was very interesting. Every single student I spoke to, and they had no idea who I was, when I said, why did you choose to come to New Mexico State? Every student said the same thing. The moment I stepped on campus, I felt like I was home. I felt like this place cared about me. Well, you know, that's a real culture. That's a real community, because that doesn't happen by accident. That means the entire campus has that culture. And as I read about your experiential learning and within the university system, that's really what it's all about. It's helping the students understand that they matter, that they're valued, that they're respected, that they're heard. So as we go through this today, I hope that we can look at that. John Gardner, he was Secretary of Education long before most of you were around. Lyndon Baines Johnson was president. But I love his quote, we're all faced with a series of great opportunities brilliantly disguised as unsolvable problems. Where else but in higher education can we talk about problems a lot, right? You know, I've always said that it's easier to move a cemetery than it is a college. Dead people will get up and walk faster than we'll change something. And so many times as we look at information, we look at this and we see that we think of things as unsolvable problems, but in reality, they're really great opportunities to make change and great opportunities to make a culture shift for students and how we value them and how we move forward. Our shared goal, student success. One of the things I'm so excited about as I look at experiential learning is it truly is bringing together student affairs and academic affairs. It really is knocking down those walls between those two areas that have existed since the history of higher ed. I teach history and philosophy of higher education at Kansas State for graduate students. And that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is how when colleges first began in this country, there was no wall because everybody did everything. And then over the years, as all of a sudden we began to bring in folks other than faculty, that wall got higher. And then on some campuses, that wall got so high that we put barbed wire on the top of it, and you could never crawl across it. As you really think about experiential learning, you really talk about tearing down that wall. You're talking about how do we all work together to help students gain and learn. And one of the things we need to think about is that when we talk about retention, which is a key word that we hear all the time, is we need to remember that way back in 1993, Vincent Tinto said to us that retention is a byproduct of a good educational experience. It should not be the goal. The goal is improving the undergraduate education for all students. If you improve the undergraduate education inside and outside the classroom, your retention rates are going to go up. Your completion rates are going to go up. The problem is, for many campuses, they've been so busy looking at numbers and not the learning environment that they've never been able to raise retention rates. And then they sit back and say, well, why? And it's because all they've looked at is how do we get numbers? You know, so we need to really think about, it's all about the learning experiences that students have, inside, outside the classroom, that really make a difference. That's going to determine if a student persists to graduation. You know, as we really think about that, many campuses are still trying to define for them what is student success. They're really trying to define the difference between retention and persistence and completion. And so as we look at it, we need to think about how do all of those things play into what we do with each other as we begin to build programs and work with students. George Kuhn talked many years ago about advising as a way to connect students to the campus and make them feel that they matter. It's all about connections. It's all about conversations. Because as we think about students coming to our campuses, how do we connect them to each other? How do we connect them to faculty? How do we connect them with advisors? How do we bring them together? Nancy King, who was at Kennesaw State, I love her quote, advisors are interpreters. Advisors are interpreters, because let's face it, guys, higher education is a foreign language. Students come on our campuses and we use words like grade point average and bursar's office and registration, matriculation, which they think is dirty. And then we wonder why they don't know what's going on. It's because we're using a foreign language. We need to interpret the higher education. It's our language, it's not their language, particularly at community colleges. Because as our first generation students come in, they have no one that they've looked up to. How many of you are first generation students? Raise your hand. Raise them high. Be proud. Okay? I was a first generation student. My mother and father dropped out of school in the 40s for daddy to go to World War II. I'm the youngest of three. My older brother's 14 years older than I am. Yeah, I was playing. And so when I got ready to go to college, I was told my entire life, you go to college. That's what I was told. Because I was like the last one. My sister went to college after she was married and had children. My brother never went to college, was a very successful contractor. But I was told forever I was going to college. Graduated from a little bitty high school in southeast Georgia. Yeah, this is not a Kansas accent. This is a Georgian accent. And was working at Sears and Roebuck in the summertime. About August, the phone rang one day and I picked it up. It's a good afternoon. This is Sears. May I help you, please? And the voice said, can I speak to Charlie Nutt? And I said, this is he. I was going to be a good English major. This is he. This is the right pronoun to use. And he said, the voice said, Charlie, this is Fred Griffith. and I knew Mr. Griffith. He was the registrar at my local community college where I was going to college that fall. He said, I understand you're coming to college. And I thought, well, how'd you figure that out? Then I remembered his wife was my art teacher in high school. So, small town. He said, I understand you're coming to college. I said, yes, sir, I am. I was so proud. He said, you might want to apply. I had not applied, folks. I was just going to show up. How many of you students just show up? They just walk in the door. You know, many times I say that students' total commitment to a community college is they can turn their blinker on. They were driving down the street, the sign said, register today. They said, I think I will. They turn to the parking lot. Because it's not something they know how to do. So are we interpreting what higher education is? That's that teaching and learning piece. That's where inside and outside the classroom, we need to be defining what learning is. Because students don't know that, particularly at community colleges as they come in. Many of our adult students, they've had a full career, maybe very successful, maybe not, but they're coming in frightened, scared, and they don't know what we're talking about. So we've got to begin to think about that. How many times have you used the word syllabus with a first generation, first time, full-time, or part-time student, and they looked at you just grinning like a Cheshire cat, but they had no idea what you were talking about? We think everyone understands the word syllabus. Let me tell you, folks, first generation, first-time students have no idea what that word means. And all of a sudden, we've scared them because we're using language that we think is very common. So as we think about this, it's not just the language in the classroom of the content, it's also the language about what higher education is and what it means as we move forward and look at that. Advice is an integral part of the academic mission of the campus. We need to clearly see that advising is tied to what we do in learning and teaching. It is not a service. It's not something that's outside of the university's academic mission. And we've got to tie it to that academic mission because students are learning, reflecting, and making meaning of their college experience through academic advising. Many times that's where they have the conversations about what's the real value of the liberal arts. What's the real value of English or math or art? Because in those classrooms, many times we don't think about that. You know, I taught English for 20-something, 30 years. And I could talk with students about writing 5-paragraph essays forever. But I'm not sure I ever really explained the value of writing in relation to outside that one class. But as an advisor, we have those conversations with students about that value and how to pull that together. Because it's important that students not only get the content, but as defined in your program of experiential learning, it's the idea of bringing and making meaning of that content and using that content to change their lives in the workforce, in their career, academically, whatever the case may be. So as advisors and faculty, we bring those pieces together for students. But we have to intentionally do that. And that's what this is all about, intentionality. It cannot happen by accident. It can't happen simply because they walk in our office. What are we intentionally doing every day to tie the students' learning inside the classroom to what they're doing outside the classroom, and how are we partnering with each other to make sure that occurs? Advisors lead students reflecting and making meaning of key issues for success from day one, from the very first day. For example, the idea of amount of time needed to study versus their expectations. Students come to college with the idea of about from high school where 80% of their time was spent in the class, and if they did 80% of listening and taking notes, they could do maybe 20% at home and still pass. We flipped that around in college. You know, we're expecting them 80% of their time is outside the classroom, 20% is in. But they don't know that. So they come with the expectation that I can do college exactly how I did high school. If I show up every day and I just listen, I don't have to read the book. I don't have to read the chapters. I don't have to join in the conversations because I'm getting that information. And all of a sudden, it's very different when they come here. So who's telling them that? Who's having that conversation? Because intentionally, we have to discuss that with students because they don't know that. And then how do they apply that to what they do every day as they work in their academic courses becomes key. Because just knowing that is not enough. It's how do we teach them to use that? The idea of what a particular program of study involves versus a perception. You've had the students walk into you in your office and say, I want to be a computer technologist. That's what I want to do. But I really don't like to be inside. I'd really be in that park all day long. Well, luckily today, you can do a lot of stuff anywhere with computers. But at some point, you're not going to be able to be out in the forest the entire time. But to them, that's what that means. It's the same thing with students who say they want to be a nurse. Nursing is big in every community college with the idea of an impacted program. A lot of times students will say, I want to be a nurse because I want to help people. Well, there's lots of ways to help people that has nothing to do with nursing. But have we had that conversation with students? I always tell the story of the student that I failed totally as an advisor. 25, 30 maybe, coming back to school. She was married, she had her children, her husband had gone to college, he'd finished his degree, he was now successful, it was her time. So she was all excited, Laura, never forget her. And Laura blew the top off the SAT at our college. She was going to be a nursing student. At our college, you had to pass all your core subjects before you could get accepted into nursing. She did that. There were like 60 slots out of 400 people who applied. She got one of those slots. We did the happy dance. I sent her all over to nursing. I was finished. I'd done my job. Well, the next semester, about the middle of the semester, my secretary came in. She said, Charlie, there's this hysterically crying woman outside. Would you talk to her? I said, sure, send her in. Of course, being a good advisor, I had exactly what every good advisor has on your desk. What is that? A box of Kleenex. Okay. Well, in walks Laura, and she's not just crying. It's not just tears. It's the mascara's running. I mean, she's just hysterically crying. I can't do this. It's horrible. I've got to drop out. And she's just babbling. And I'm trying to calm her down and get her to talk to me. And I finally get her calmed down. And I said, what's going on? Is it the courses? No, I've got A's and everything. It's fine. Well, is it the blood? No, blood and mommy, it's fine. Are you having trouble at home with the kids? Oh, my husband took the kids. I haven't seen them much. It's great. And I said, what is wrong? And she said, Dr. Nutt, this is little man on my floor at the hospital. And she said, he's never had a flower. He's never had a card. He's never had a visitor. He's never had a phone call. She said, they're releasing him today. There's nobody to pick him up. My husband won't let me bring him home. Never once has I said to that student, why do you want to be a nurse? Have you ever been around somebody who's sick and scared and dying all alone? Have you ever been around? I never asked her that. She wanted to be a nurse. I got her the nursing program. No, yes, we got her a major change. She was very successful. But look what I put her through when if I had simply said, do you know what a nurse does? Have you ever shadowed a nurse for a full day in a hospital or in an emergency room? Because she had not. To her, that was a good field. She could make good money. If they ever transferred with her husband's job, she could get a job anywhere. You've heard all the reasons I want to be a nurse. And she realized that wasn't for her. But I put her through a whole lot of angst that I could have stopped her from. And I just asked that simple question and had her think about the meaning of what she wanted to do versus who she was. So you have to think about those. And then the college culture versus the high school culture, totally different. And we know that, you know that, but our students don't know that. It's always the students that come in that think it's going to be the same thing. I remember the young lady that was the student assistant in my office, and I was vice president for academic and student affairs. I should have checked on this student. And this was one of our really bright students. She was a top-notch student, did very well in high school. It was her first year. Second semester, she came in bawling because she said, I can't find it in my classes. I go everything, nobody's there. Never thought for us to even say to her, now you do know you have to register. And go. She was doing like high school. You went to the same classroom every day, the same faculty member was there, everybody. She couldn't find her teachers. She couldn't find her class. No one had ever said to her, it's a totally different world now. The students that walk into you and say, I'm looking for Dr. Staff. Okay, or TIBA, to be announced. Okay, because they don't know what all that means. The culture is totally different. The culture of what it means to be a student in high school and what it means to be a student in college are two different things. Are we defining that culture for students? Or are we simply allowing them to figure it out themselves? And many times by the time they figure that out, they're out the door. Many students walk away from our colleges, particularly community colleges, and they're never missed. And part of that is because they don't understand the culture, and they don't understand that someone's there that really is committed to them. So intentionally, how are we building those partnerships? Advisors should be at the core of the institutional mission rather than layered on as a service. Whether you're a faculty advisor or a full-time advisor or a mentor, whatever your title is, all of us advise students. And we need to think about that in terms of what we do every single day. So we need to understand that we're core to the institutional mission, no matter what your title may be. The action of advising, the conversations with students is core to what we do. And I think that's what's exciting about the experiential learning piece that you're putting into all your institutions, is it clearly is tied to that core mission. And it's tied to where you want to be. There's an article that came out recently by former NACADA president, Eric White, and it was academic advice in higher education, a place at the core. And it's in the Journal of General Education, Club of Commons and Humanities. But Eric says the purposes of academic advice is to accommodate all students so they can make reasoned demands. I love those words, reasoned demands, as they set and enact their goals. Reasoned demands. How many of our students come in and have unreasonable demands of us? But more importantly, how many of them have unreasonable demands of themselves within that? So how do we teach them what a reasonable demand is? And the last part is even more important, as they set and enact their goals. It's not our job to do that, folks. It's our job to teach them how to do that. And many students will sit there and let us make those decisions for them. And we have to be very clear to them, these are their decisions. It's their goals they're enacting. But if we don't teach them how to do it, if we don't teach them the processes, then they're not able to do that. So we have to really think of that as we think about what we do every day as we talk to students. Advising teaches students, Eric goes on to say, number one, to craft their own education. I love the word craft. Create, mold, develop, not just take courses, not just follow a pathway. I'm not saying pathways are wrong. I'm just saying that it's more than just following a pathway or a set of aligned courses. It's actually crafting their education, crafting where they're going. Many students have never thought about it in those terms. They think it's being put upon them to do, when in reality what we're doing is setting up for them the processes in which they craft it for themselves, but we have to teach them how to do that. We have to teach them those skills. We have to teach them those abilities. Understands the knowledge and skill and work, taking what they learned here and put it into the workforce as they move forward. And this is a key nation, worldwide. In the United Kingdom right now and in the Netherlands right now, they're on a very big focus of the whole concept of career development and moving forward after college. So it's not just a U.S. issue or North American issue. It's an international issue that folks are looking at. So are we looking at that as well? Critical culture of learning around the undergraduate experience. Is there a culture of learning or is there a culture of course taking? There's two different things. And on many campuses, it's a culture of taking the right course that gets you graduated, not a culture of learning that gets you graduated. What is the culture you're creating in your conversations with students? Because culture is created. Culture just doesn't happen. And you can create a culture of compliance that has nothing to do with learning, or you create a culture of learning by a university or institutional-wide initiatives like you're doing that makes a difference. But it's not going to happen simply because you have it in a catalog. Students have to understand those concepts. And then engage in their own education. I think that's so important. We talk about engagement a lot. I'm going to talk about engagement further on. But we need to understand that students need to be engaged in their education, not just taking courses, not just taking tests. But the exciting thing about experiential learning is you're making them, and you're giving them the pathways of how to be engaged with their academics and be engaged with their courses. Transform the educational experience to reach passions, not just jobs. Many of you are here because you're passionate. You're not here because you thought you would make a lot of money. If you were, you needed a better advisor. okay, because you got the wrong field. All right? So it's the idea here, folks, that we got to get students to understand their passion is what this is all about. Because if they're passionate, that job is going to be the right one for them. That career is going to be it. How many students have graduated from college? Many of you may have children who are that way and never get a job in that field. Okay? And many times there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to help them understand why there is. How many of you in this room are doing exactly what you did, what your undergraduate degree was in every day? Raise your hand. Okay, there are no faculty in here, only one. Okay. Faculty are people who do that. Okay, everybody else in the world does other things. So who better to talk to students about the difference between a career and a major? Students have no idea they're two different things. You know, they come to college and they think that career is going to be their major. You know when a student has no idea what they do, what they want to do, or what they're doing when they tell you they want to be a CSI. Because that means they want to live on South Beach and drive a Hummer. Okay, they do not know it's a criminal forensic scientist and they've got to take science. Okay, so we got to help them understand those pieces and how to move forward. Being learning focused, as we look at what you're doing and across the campus and across the university, but everywhere, involves understanding several things. First, is the learning liberated or transactional? Are students being liberated to think for themselves, to move forward, to tie what they're doing to the workforce? Are they thinking about it in terms of changing who they are? Or is it simply transactional? I take the right courses, I take the test, I make the grade, I move forward. What is the culture that your campus is setting up? What's the culture you're creating in your classroom? What's the culture you're creating in your office as you work with students? Is it a transformational, liberating culture, or is it a transactional culture? Students quickly pick up on that, guys, by the conversations we have with them. So think about that. What is the student learning? What's the student learning after they meet with you? If a student has met with you as an advisor, what have they learned because they met with you? I'm asked all the time, should every student be required to see an advisor every semester to get registered? And I have one simple question, and that is, if they see you, what is the learning outcome? What are they learning because they met with you? If they're learning they simply need a PIN number to get registered, then what they've learned is that you have nothing to do with their education, you're just there to transactionally get them in a course. We teach students that advices about registration by the policies, procedures, and processes we set up. They don't come to college thinking that. Somewhere along the line, we teach them that. So what are we teaching them about what they're learning? So when a student meets with you as an advisee, what have they learned in that 20 to 30 to 15 minutes they may be with you? Because if they're not learning something, then that time becomes something that they just think they have to do to check off a box. So we need to think about that. How is a student learning? Is it a conversation that's a dialogue or a monologue? Are you doing all the talking, or are you making them talk? You know, as a first-time teacher, I remember my very first year of teaching 9th grade 100 years ago, and I remember the thing I hated worse than anything was silence. You know, I'd ask a question, nobody would say a word, so I would jump in very quickly and give them the answer. So what they do, they figured out quickly that if they just waited, I'd give them the answer to everything. Well, folks, I've gotten old and crotchety, because now I'll just stand there and look at you for days until you answer. Because it's not me, it's you that should be thinking about that. I tell my students all the time, sing me a song, do me a dance, tell me a joke, but tell me something. Because I'm not going to give you the answer to that. When a student comes in and you say, how are things going this semester, and they say good, because that's what they all say, or okay, or fine, how are they defining fine? How are they defining good? How are they defining okay? Because they're just using that term not to have to answer anything else for you. So as we think about that, what are the questions we're asking, and what are the responses we're getting, and how are we encouraging those students to go further than just define okay or good, to really define what that looks like? My question is always to the student, tell me what that would look like if you think you're doing good. How do you know you're doing good? Well, I guess I am. I haven't failed anything yet. Okay, so your goal in college is simply not to fail anything. Oh no, I'm going to make all A's. Well, not if that's your goal, because you just told me that was going good because you were failing. But it's the idea that they're not thinking of those until we help them see those. Are they applying what they're learning in those environments with you? Are they applying it inside the classroom? Are they applying it outside the classroom? Are they going to apply it when they graduate? How they applied what they're learning? And then how is the current learning positioned them for future learning? One of the things that students need help with is understanding how throughout their educational experience, from the time they enter here in a CUNY school and then move forward and graduate from a university, do they clearly know how they transfer and how all that connects? Are they simply doing one thing at a time to move forward? And we have to help students understand those pieces. If you've not looked at the recent new book that's out by John Gardner in the Research Center at the John Gardner Institute and his team, I encourage you to look at it. The Undergraduate Experience Focusing Institutions on What Matters Most. It's an excellent book, just came out last year. One of the things that the authors say, I think, is very telling. And they say that we have all we need if we want to change undergraduate education. We have optimism, because if we weren't optimistic, we wouldn't show up every day. We have muscle, we have patience, we have teamwork. The idea is, how do we make that to fit into the concept that we cannot have a magic bullet? There's not a magic bullet, there's not a magic gimmick, there's not a best computer system in the world that you can buy to make things work. And a lot of institutions are spending millions of dollars on computer technology, but they've not thought about how that ties to students' learning. I'm not saying technology is bad, but what I am saying is, are you looking at the technology in terms of what students are learning and how that applies to what they're learning as we move forward? Because many times we're trying to find that magic bullet or that silver bullet to try to find out what that is. So what do they say matters most? Well, the first thing they say is everybody's got to be motivated to learn. Students, faculty, administrators, critical culture of learning, not compliance. That every single person in the college or university has to be committed to learning and has to be motivated to learn. And that means that we've got to do things like what you do with experiential learning, that you're moving forward and thinking about what this means for students as they progress. Relationships of all kinds. Students will tell you all the time that it's the relationships they remember from college, not classes. Have you read the book by Richard Light back in 2000, Making the Most of College? Richard Light was at Harvard, so because he was at Harvard, he got the front page of the Chronicle. We could have written the book and never even got any notification. Did a 10-year longitudinal study of 1,800 graduates from Harvard, in which they did a qualitative study. They basically asked one question: what mattered the most to you? Why did you graduate and many of your colleagues not graduate? And they went into it. Richard Light will tell you that he never thought advising mattered. What the students told the researchers were very simple, that it was the relationship with a faculty member or an advisor that made the difference in their lives. Well, that's powerful, folks. If our students are telling us that it's relationships that matter, but we're not focused on those relationships, then we're not really listening to our students. It becomes key. How are you building those relationships in your offices? How are you building those relationships in the classrooms? How are you getting students to work together to build those relationships and move forward? Because students do not know how to do that on their own. Once again, I was a first generation student. My father told me to start, get out, get a job, and not make C's because he wasn't paying for them. I graduated from high school in fall of some year. And exactly 3 years later, I was back teaching at the same high school I graduated from. I was teaching students I went to high school with. Okay? Why? I don't know. No one told me I didn't have to. So I went every quarter. This was back in the quarter days. I went every quarter. I took 18 to 22 hours every quarter. I got out. I went to work. I can't tell you one thing about my undergraduate experience, except I got in, I got out, I got a job. We talk about the undergraduate experience all day long, but if we're not creating that for students, you'll have students like me. I got through, I've been successful, But as I talked to other folks and realized that they had a whole different experience than I did, I really see what I missed. I really understand that I got a job, but I didn't really get an education until many years after I got that bachelor's degree. So we have to think about that as we work with our students. Clear and high expectations are intentionally set and clearly communicated. Students are never going to rise to low expectations. If you only want them to make a C, that's all they're going to make. If you only want them to see you as an advisor in order to get registered, that's the only time they're going to see you. Do you expect them to come see you beyond just registration time? What's the value of those appointments? What are they learning from that? Set those expectations high, and students will reach those expectations, just like in our classrooms. But if we set the lowest minimal possible for our students in the advisory relationship, that's all they're going to make. We have to realize that as we're looking forward. Alignment of resources, policies, and practices. You're doing a very good job with working with that in this system. But a lot of campuses still say one thing, but they put money in different places. Or they say one thing, and the policies and practices are still the things that they had in the 60s. And you'll say to them, why are you still doing that? And what's the answer? Because we've always done it that way. Okay? Or somebody has a really good idea. Somebody young and fresh has a good idea, and you come to somebody old like me, and I say, oh, we did that 30 years ago. Didn't work then, won't work now. Instead of giving her an idea about, well, let's think about how that might work. So are we keeping things where they are? Or are we really looking at how we can change what we do in order to meet the students we have today, not the students we had in the 70s? Because they're two different groups of students. And many campuses are still doing the same. Assessment of learning in all areas. Are you assessing the learning that's going on inside the classroom and outside the classroom? If you're defining what students learn when they meet with you as an advisor, how are you assessing that learning? How are you assessing whether a student learned what it means to be a college student versus a high school student? How are you assessing whether that student learned what it means to meet a goal in a class or not meet a goal in a class? Most campuses are still only doing assessment of advising through student satisfaction surveys, or what I call as bean counting. And that is that you saw 9,000 students this morning from 8:50 to 8:55. Okay, so you must be a good advisor. We have no idea if they learned anything. We have no idea what the conversations were, but you saw a bunch of students. Satisfaction is great. We want students to be happy. But just because a student is happy doesn't mean they learned anything. And we all know that many students don't tell us they're happy until something happens, and then when they're unhappy, it's because they didn't get what they wanted. And many times satisfaction surveys about advising, students are responding to with things that have nothing to do with academic advising. It has to do with course availability. It has to do with when classes are offered. It has to do with who's teaching, but it has nothing to do with the advising appointment they just had. I'm not happy because I couldn't get all my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That has nothing to do with that conversation and that appointment I just had. But if we're only assessing what we do by the satisfaction, then we're not talking about learning. So how are you assessing the learning? What are your learning outcomes for academic advising? And what are your assessment processes for measuring whether students have learned what you say they're going to learn within that? Alamo County Community College District in San Antonio has set up for their 9 institutions, I think they're now up to, learning outcomes for all students, 0 to 15 hours, 15 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90. And they clearly track when students have learned and identified and met those outcomes. Now that means for some students that may be a whole year if they're a part-time student. Or if they're a full-time student, that may be 1 semester. But they clearly have defined what it is students need to know each step of the way through their associate degree. So that when students come in, they give them that college syllabus. They give them those outcomes by quarter hour or by semester hour, and then they talk to them about it each semester as they move forward. And then they measure that through various different ways of having students produce documents, having the conversation, tracking it within their system. So we have to begin to think about that in relation to that. And then leadership at all levels, not the top, to share the common vision and purpose. What's your common vision or purpose for student success? And leadership is everyone. I'm a strong believer it's just not the person who has a president or vice chancellor or dean in front of their name. Every one of us is a leader. And students look at us as we're all leaders within that. So what's that mean to be a leader and move forward? So what is leadership? So in my terms, I agree with Dr. Roast when he said that leadership is an influence relationship among leaders and followers or constituencies that intend real changes that reflect their real purposes. What's the purpose of academic advising at your institution, in your department, in your system, and then how are you reflecting that in what you do and the changes that you make? And how are you working together to do that? That's what leadership is, coming together with each other to meet those goals. So what's the role of a leader? First of all, is to establish a clear vision. So what's your vision for advising in your office, in your department, at your university, at your college? Do you have a vision for what advising is? Do you clearly have sharing that vision with others? Do your students know what the mission or purpose of advising is at Gutman Community College? Do they know what it is at the Bronx Community College or at Brooklyn Community College or in the whole district within that? Do we clearly define for students what the purpose and vision for academic advising is, just like we do for what the purpose and vision is for our academic programs? We do it with our academic programs. We don't always do it with our other pieces. We need to think about that. Providing information, knowledge, methods to realize that vision. Coordinated balancing the conflicting interests. We were talking earlier this morning about that you may or may not have faculty involved with advising, but faculty are advising every day because students are asking those questions. But are we providing them professional development to answer those questions? Or are we just thinking because they went to college, they automatically know how to advise? And the same thing may be true for your primary role advisors. What type of professional development are you providing advisors about the field of study? Is reading and reflecting and looking at the research in the field important to you? How many of you go to staff meetings? Raise your hand if you go to staff meetings. In your staff, how much time in your staff meetings is spent reading and discussing the literature? An article from the College Journal, an article from Academic Advising Today, an article from wherever it may be, and talking about how you apply that in what you're doing. Or are you simply talking about the new policies, procedures, the new banner screens, the new PeopleSoft screens, whatever you have, the new policies? Is that all staff meetings are? Well, then what you've taught your advisors is that's all we care about, are policies and procedures. We don't care about the field of study. So are you making that an expectation? This is a great opportunity today. This is what I call a luxury, to be able to come and have this conversation with your colleagues and hear what other folks are doing. But are you going to take this back and do something with it? And then you're going to carry these conversations back and continue them every day? Or are you just going to do this once a year or twice a year or go to a kind of conference at some point? Because that's a huge difference between those two and how we're pulling those together. A leader steps up in a time of crisis, able to think and act creative with facts and data. What data do you have about your academic advising programs? I go to campuses all the time and somebody will say, advising's broken here, we need to fix it. And I say, tell me what's broken. Well, it's just broken. We just know it is. Well, how do you know it is? Well, because we get really bad satisfaction results. Well, tell me what the results are about. Because they're not really looking at the data, they're just automatically assuming it's broken. So what data are you using as a leader to make changes on your campus to really drive what you're looking at? Leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those that are in your charge. It's not about being in control of students, it's about taking care of the students and helping them to move forward. Would you let me know when it's like 10:15? Okay. So what are the questions about leadership? Who are the leadership who impact academic advising at your institution, in your department, in your district? Who are the leaders who are really looking and moving forward? Because if you don't know who the leaders are, who you know you look toward and work with? How are you determining who those leaders are? What data are you using? Is it just because Danielle has the title that makes her look like a leader? Is that what data you're using? Or are you really looking at what's going on and who's involved with decision making and how that's moving forward? How do you measure the impact of leaders on academic advising? How do you measure whether folks are involved and understand it and moving forward, or are you just assuming they are? What data do these students utilize to evaluate or assess the academic advising in programs or experiences on campus? Advising is broken based on what? And then what data do you need to provide leaders so they can move forward? If you say we need to be doing X, Y, Z with our students, what data do you have to support that? Yes, the literature may say that this type of program worked at Joe Blow College in the Midwest, but did it say anything about what it did at a college like this? So just because the literature says that, do you have any data that supports that what you're doing isn't doing the same thing? We make changes many times not based on data, but based on what somebody else is doing down the street because it looks prettier or fancier or nicer. Do we have the data for changes we're making or not? And that becomes essential. Primary principles for advising what students learn and what they deserve. Well, they deserve first informational guidance. We need to know what we're talking about, obviously. Next, intellectual mentorship. They need to have a mentor that they know are going to ask them the right questions and move forward, and then developmental relationships. Another way to look at this is they want to know that we know stuff, they want to know we're there to talk to, and then they want to know we care. And I believe that they know we care, they'll let us slide on the first two. Because if they know we care, they know we'll find out what we don't know and get back with them. If they know we care, they know that we'll be there when they need us. But that doesn't mean that we'll be there every minute of the day. Okay, what's the worst thing you could do as an advisor or faculty member if you get an email at midnight? Answer it. Right? Because then every student gets the word, Danielle answers email all the time. She never sleeps. So y'all just talk to her all the time. Okay, that's the worst thing you can do. We got to set some limits on students. We've got to say when we're there and what we're doing, but we got to be straightforward with them within that. We advise you decide. We're not here to make the decisions for you. We're here to teach you how to make the decisions. But if you haven't built learning outcomes and processes and developmental strategies for teaching students that, then they are still going to assume you're there to make those decisions for them. And 9 to 1, you're still making the decisions for them because you're not really basing it on teaching and learning. You're basing it on compliance and taking the right courses. So I want to think about that as we move forward. I encourage you to go back and look at an NACADA journal. In 2010, it was written by Lee Schaefer and some colleagues. They talked about that professionalization of advising. Where were we in 2010? And at that time, they said that advising was not a profession. And the primary reason was there wasn't enough literature, there wasn't enough research, and there wasn't enough discussion among advisors about things other than scheduling and registration. So I think we've made a lot of progress since 2010, but we need to keep working and move forward. And how do we do that? First of all, we need to understand without data, you're just a person with an opinion. And like my mama used to say, everybody has an opinion and a belly button. Okay? So just because you got an opinion doesn't mean it's right. Do you have any data to back it up on? And a lot of folks have a lot of opinions that drive what we do without any data to back it up. Students are the first ones who will look at you and tell me and say, why do I need to do that? We don't do that enough. But our students are going to demand that from us. We need to really think about that as we move forward. Student engagement, we know, is that intersection between the college and the student and where we meet. What impact and influence do we have over students, and what they do is what engagement's all about, and how do we move forward. And if you've not looked at the Drive to Degree survey, I encourage you to do that. You could go to the NACADA website and look at the data from last year. I hope that many of you this week, early next week, will be getting the latest survey that's coming out to be completed. But one of the things they looked at was that student engagement was the highest priority for campuses who were very focused on technology and technology being used in the classroom. The idea that just because you had technology didn't mean students were engaged with the technology or engaged with the learning. And the more technology savvy you were, the more important engagement is. We think if we just buy all the bells and whistles, students will automatically be engaged. And that's not the case. And we have to move forward and think about that. Out of nearly 2,000 or out of 1,000 respondents to a particular question, the lack of student engagement was a significant barrier. 30% of the respondents said that was a significant barrier to student success, was the lack of engagement with their education, with their classes, with the technology that supported that. So we have to think about that, because if we know that that's an issue, then how are we changing that, or how are we getting them engaged? So I want to know, as you look at that, how do you define engagement? What's engagement in the CUNY system? That's not a rhetorical question. What's engagement? How do you define it? This is not my classroom. I will call on someone. How do you define engagement?
There's many levels of engagement. In the classroom, like you just said, and outside the classroom, being involved.
Okay, that's where.
Okay.
What is engagement? What's it going to look like if I see you?
Being an active participant of your learning.
Do what?
Being an active participant of your learning.
Be an active participant in my learning. How am I going to recognize that?
Taking opportunities that are provided by college.
Good. Okay. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I was thinking more so in the classroom, right, and now actively processing, right? So being not a participant, but actually being active in the sense that you're processing and analyzing information and being a constituent a part.
Good.
Right? And not just passively absorbing, just asking questions and, the analysis that takes place while you're listening to someone, for instance. That's the engagement.
Okay. Danielle?
If a student can articulate how a learning experience that she's had, whether in or out of the classroom, fits in with her goals and plans
Good.
for the future.
Good. Who else? Yes?
I think it's commitment.
Commitment.
So it's not just checking a box. It's really.
Okay. How are we going to know commitment when we see it?
Well, part of it is what the single A said about being present.
Okay.
Part of it is going above and beyond, not just doing the minimum. Really
Okay.
being active.
Good. Good. What else?
Relationships.
Relationships. Okay.
On behalf of students when they're not falling asleep in the classroom.
With a not falling asleep in the classroom. I used to call it the goal to the ball look. And just because you're not drooling yet, they think you're paying attention. Okay, some of y'all been at the ball this morning already. I've been seeing y'all shop. Okay, yes, sir.
I was going to actually say, make sure that students, just because they're not saying anything, making sure that you ask them and create initiation.
Good. Creating initiation with students. Having that conversation.
Yeah, not just going and being active, but initiating.
Good. What else? Very good. What else?
Articulating how they came to a particular decision or the decision making.
Good. Articulating how they came to a decision. How did you decide on this pathway? How did you decide on this major? How did you decide on this college within that? Now, the next question is, if that's all engagement, then what are you doing to ensure that your students are engaged? What activities, what changes, what processes, what procedures, what training, what development, what assessment are you doing to be sure that what you just said is the experience that students are having at your institutions? That becomes important, and we're not doing that well on most of our campuses. We know that the data sources that many campuses use, the NESI, the SESI, and if you look at that, the data across academic community, across the institution, what analysis have you done with peer institutions? Have you looked at institutions who are also doing experiential learning or also doing the type of advising you're doing and seen how they're working within that. We don't do enough looking at other institutions or their role for advising. We tend to do it academically, but we don't tend to do it with advising, and we need to do a better job of talking about that. How's the analysis compared from year to year? You know, one of the things that George Koo, who developed the NESI, and Kay McClenny, who worked with Accessi, will tell you is that there's a lot of NESI and CESI data out there that's never utilized. It just sits on a shelf. NACADA is opening at Kansas State this coming fall. It's going to be the first ever in the world, a Center for Research and Academic Advising. And one of the pieces of that we're working with, collaborating with NESI about, is that we're going to actually be housing the NESI and CESI data about advising in our research center. Why? Because the NESI Center says that's the least used data for research in any of the NESI components, is the data about academic advising for research and analysis. So what we want to do is try to make that usable and make it a part of what folks are doing. What measurements to implement and assess new strategies? You're putting these strategies into place for experiential learning. How are you measuring whether they're successful? And not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom as we have those conversations. What are the results? How they communicated? If we find out that students are learning because of these strategies and advising, how are you communicating that to the community? How are you communicating that to your constituents? How are you communicating that to students? Many times students are the people we don't ever communicate our assessment results to. And that needs to be a place that we are telling them what's occurring and how we're working moving forward. One of the things we need to think about is how advisors in your district involved with decision making and the utilization of data. On most campuses, advisors are not actively involved with decision making. They're actively involved with implementation, but not decisions when it comes to policies, procedures, technology. Well, if they're the folks who need to implement that, how are they involved with the discussion of it? Becomes key as we think about moving forward. And then how are students involved? How are students involved with learning what's available and talking about those? So how do you define student success? Needs to be a question that you ask. On many campuses, that conversation's never been had at an institutional level. There's never been an opportunity to bring people together from all constituents on a campus and define what student success means for your college, and then talk about what you're putting into place to be sure students are achieving that success. You're doing that with experiential learning. How you're going to do that as you bring advising into the picture becomes key as you're moving forward. 6 reasons why students don't graduate. This was a New York Times article on April the 6th, 2017. Many of you may have read it. I thought it was very fascinating. 6 reasons that students tell us they don't graduate. This is from students. 1, working overtime. 25 hours or above, students are more likely to quit school if they're working that many hours or above. The 12 credit fallacy. The idea that if I take 12 credits, that's full time. When we know that it's not full time, but students think it is. If we don't have that conversation about taking a full load of 15 hours. Transfer, you'll lose credit. Students feel like if they transfer, they're going to lose credit. And many times that is true within that. Many times within districts, that's true. In the state of Georgia, one of the community colleges, one of the large, well, the only really large one, for many years had the problem of they had 7 campuses and they weren't even accepting courses from campus to campus at the same institution. So how can students transfer and believe that the credits are going to be accepted at a 4-year college they're going to go to if they're not accepted from campus to campus? So we've got to begin thinking about that. Veering off course. Taking the wrong courses, moving the wrong pathway within that. Last, no social life. The idea that students at community colleges who we think tell us that they don't want to have social lives, want to have social lives. They want to be connected to our campuses, but we're not providing that opportunity for them to be. And then last, falling behind, making poor grades and not keeping up. And all of these things apply to it. So the key becomes, as you're thinking about teaching and learning and experientially teaching and learning, how are you dealing with those 6 areas that students tell us is the reason they drop out? How are you going to teach that in the advising appointment and talk to students about that? Because many times they're not going to talk to faculty in the classroom about those, they're going to talk to you about those. So what are the ways that you're going to bring those into your curriculum as you work with students? So one of the things you want to think about is, what do you believe that your campus, your institution has done to have a successful advising program? Have you really analyzed what you've done or what you haven't done? Is your advising program successful or not? And why do you think it is or think it isn't? We need to take time to have that conversation. Because on many campuses, we're still just thinking about, are students getting registered in time? Are the lines not long? Are they getting into the right courses? And that's all that matters within that. To what extent do you think there's clear ownership of advising by the advising community? Are they involved with policies, procedures, processes? Are you involved with policies, procedures, and processes? Or are you simply implementing them? Who knows what students are asking more than advisors and faculty? And many times we're not involved in decision making and looking at those processes, and we need to be. I'm running out of time, but you will all get a copy of this. There's a lot of discussion on reform these days. I think we need to think about what the word reform means as we think of our colleges and institutions. Put a change, improved a form or condition, to amend or improve by change of form, removal of faults or abuses, become changed for the better. We would hope that this is what reform is about. That we're not just looking at all the bad things, that we're not just looking at all the things that other people are doing, but we're trying to change the lives of students for the better. Just like the song from Wicked. How do we change life for the better for students? And how are we doing that as we work with our processes and procedures? Recent movements that are affecting academic advising across the country. A lot of work's coming out of the Gates Foundation with the IPASS project. Many of your campuses may be involved with those. But Achieving the Dream projects, the Drive to Degree survey that's been done for advising with the Titan Group. Many of you may have seen recently APLU, the Association of Public and Land Grant Institutions through IPASS, has put together a set of courses specifically geared at institutional presidents, chancellors, vice provost, provost level about what is academic advising, what's the foundation, what's the research, what's the theory and practice, because those are the people who know the least about what the process of advising is. And for many campuses, the problem is folks at the top don't know how to talk to frontline advisors and have a communication about what really matters for students. So it's really exciting to see this association working with chancellors and presidents. So if you've not looked at their website, I encourage you to, or forward it to your chancellor or president to look at, because it would be something very valuable. Game Changers from College of America, many of you have been involved in those. We've been working with them with the 15 to Finish. Many of you, I hope, saw the video, the webcast that we did on 15 to Finish and a set of shared principles between NACADA and College of America about what that means. Please go to the NACADA website if you've not and look at those principles, because the key is it's not about signing up for 15 hours. It's about understanding what that means to your life, why it's important, why that's how you're going to graduate in a timely manner, and helping students to be okay with not taking 15 hours, but understanding what that's going to do to them financially and long term. It is not saying that we should force every student into 15 hours, but it is saying, are we having that conversations with students? Because students believe 12 hours is a full load because of financial aid and insurance. I want to stay on my parents' insurance, I got to have 15 hours. I want to keep my financial aid, so I need, 12 hours, because that's full time. So we need to think about that and have that conversation with students. The Purpose First initiative, which I'm sure you're involved with, is working with the idea of students coming out of high school prepared for college in regard to what they want to do and moving forward in a career. The idea that we can't wait till they get here to have that conversations with them, and that we need to be building partnerships between colleges, high schools, industries about that initiative. That's one of the game changers that's being talked about. I encourage you to go and look at the College of Complete America website if you've not, because there's a lot of good research and information there that is very valuable. As I said earlier, the NACADA Research Center will be opening this fall. You're doing some exciting work in this district. I'd love for this district to be one of the first districts to do a community college study about academic advising and the impact on students, because what you could do with that would be phenomenal. So those of you who are thinking about master's thesis, doctoral dissertations, you want to get involved with research, see me after this during the day, and I'll get you connected, whoever you need to get connected with. Because we need more research from community college folks about student success and academic advising, because there's very little out there. There's very little out there. And then we're in the process, many of your institutions, and Scott Evan back here, and this institution was very, very involved with creating the John Gardner Foundations of Excellence program that looks at the first year experience. They're now doing the Gateway to Completion program that looks at gateway courses. We're partnering with them to create a process of looking at what is excellence in academic advising and having an institution do a year-long study as an institution about your advising program based on the 9 criteria of excellence for advising, developing an action plan, and then you'll have a consultant group that will work with you to move that action plan forward in the second year to make the changes that you've identified. That process will be beginning in fall of 2018 within that. So follow and begin looking at that. What presently exists, we need to begin thinking about the professional development for leaders on our campuses. What do they know about academic advising and the research and the criteria and the theory and the practice behind it? What data are your leaders provided about academic advising on your own campus? Are they provided data about the number of advisees, that the ratios? Are they provided information about that you have learning outcomes? Do they know these? So we need to think about that, because our leaders can't support us if they don't know what we're doing. So what data do they have? Are they knowledgeable about the research in the field? How many of you are sharing information that when you go to the NACADA conference, or you read the NACADA journal, or you read a Foundations of Excellence journal, or whatever research you're reading about student success, are you sharing that with your leaders? Because they're not reading that information, but you are. So how are you sharing those ideas? Last, when a student leaves your office, can they leave knowing that you believe in these practices and theories, and that you believe in these statements? That your role is to encourage students, to engage students, to support critical thought, not just taking courses, to inspire dreams, and to cultivate learning. When a student leaves your office, they need to know that these are your values and that these are the things that you're striving for when you work with them. What you do every day changes lives, folks. And what you do for student success is phenomenal. We just don't say it enough, and we don't thank you enough for all you do. So thank you on behalf of students everywhere for the work you do. Thank you for what you're doing every day in your offices, and thank you for what you're doing in the classroom, because it makes a difference in students' lives. And thank you for letting me be a part of it today. Thank you.